Welcome back, friends. Jamie, your mythic game master, here with you once again. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about RIFTS, specifically about my RIFTS game, as I was asked by one of the viewers to talk a little bit more about it. I thought I would talk some about how I first came into contact with RIFTS, the game, my first experiences with it, and some of the aspects that have kept me enthralled with it over the years. And then I would talk a little bit about my thought process behind coming up with my current RIFTS campaign that I'm running. So here we go. The first thing that caught my attention, you see it right here, the cover on the bookshelf. When I saw this, I think it was in like Borders bookstore at the time. Maybe it was a Walden Books. One of those bookstores that's now lost to time. I know it wasn't a Books a Million because those weren't quite around in that area, at least in that era, at least not in my neck of the woods. But when I saw this on the shelf, I mean, it just jumped right out at me. First, I mean, because it has this entire future punk aesthetic to it. If it was just this tentacle monster in the middle, that would be one thing. But then you also have the Amazon warrior women, the blind bodyguards around the Splurgoth there, and they have this entire kind of BDSM thing going on, for lack of a better term. And right away, you're getting so much of what RIFTS is right on the cover. Something that is both wildly imaginative, um, evocative in thought and concept, but also slightly edgy and dangerous. When this came out, I guess in 1991, I was on my way off to school, so it wasn't as big of a deal. Whereas if I had had this 10 years earlier, my parents might have freaked out at the house, which they did over certain things like Savage Sword of Conan and various other black and white comic magazines of the time. But another selling point is the fact that it says right there on the cover that it's a complete new role playing game. I mean, sometimes that's very important to me, especially when I'm being introduced to a new game. I want something to be complete. I don't want to buy a book and part of it to say, well, if you want to play a wizard, you actually have to go buy this other book that's all about wizards. Since it says it's complete right there, I'm hoping that it has all of the player information that I need inside. And lo and behold, it does. That's one of the great things about that original book. You could just kind of plug and play with this book alone and add so much to your tabletop. Now, before I go too much further, for people that are not familiar with RIFTS, if this is the first time you've ever even heard of RIFTS, I mean, I could spend an entire series of videos or podcasts just talking about the RIFTS setting. It's that rich and that deep and that detailed. So we'll have to just do a very, very, very brief and hopefully succinct explanation of what RIFTS is. Because RIFTS is essentially about our Earth, except it is our Earth in the future, in a time during which the Earth has been transformed into something completely different. It is an apocalyptic future after a nuclear war, which triggered the opening of rifts all across the Earth. It essentially turned the Earth into this kind of nexus point for psychic and magic energy in all of the universe and all of the known multiverse, and what in Palladium books they refer to as the megaverse, which I think is just great. Every conceptual verse should have its own adjective of some sort. So I like that, the megaverse. So now imagine you've got this rifts world where these strange rift portals open up along ley lines being, sources of magical, psychic, latent psychic energy running across the earth. Anytime they intersect, you have the possibility for a rift to open up. And these rifts can be portals to anywhere. It can be a portal throughout time. It can be a portal to a different part of the universe. It can be a portal to a different dimension. Now, because of that, Earth was just flooded with these extra dimensional beings, known colloquially as DBs. So anyway, while I'm talking about this, I should probably set some of this to just keep moving, because there's so much to describe. you know, DBs are dimensional beings. That's kind of the slang for it. But anyway, you're getting a taste of what it was that just immediately drew me into Rifts. Now, at first, this was kind of the latest in the series of the Palladium book game system, okay, which I guess started with Palladium Fantasy, which I had very limited experience with. I'm not sure if I ever actually played a full game. I might have played a game and I'm not sure what happened. I rolled some dice, something happened, and then we never played it again. Making the characters was very complicated. But when they came out with their Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness role playing game, which was a different version of the Palladium games, all the same kind of D20 early Dungeons and Dragons clone, essentially using those mechanics, but a bunch of house rules piled on top of it. So if you were familiar with D&D, you could jump over to Palladium, and you could jump over to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and you could jump over to Rifts. Now, somewhere between Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Rifts, we actually did start making more characters, because the concepts were a bit more outrageous. You couldn't make these kind of Ninja Turtles with D&D concepts. Now, you could maybe do something like that in GURPS, but they didn't have the source books for it, literally. So the Palladium series is the one that offered that capability. And then when Rifts came out, I was like, whoa, this is great, because you're always kind of intrigued by that apocalyptic setting, that kind of Mad Max world where it's, what's happening to humanity after the world has quote unquote ended. And there are so many elements to it that make it great, like such as the coalition states and the federations of magic and the return of Atlantis and all these great things. So the first thing you have to do when says they're going to play a Rifts game is you have to decide where in Rifts you're going to focus your game. You can see here I'm just kind of randomly flashing the cover images for you, which were another big thing for me. I mean, if you have an evocative cover, it will draw you to the book. That's the other crazy thing about Rifts. Now, once I bought the original book and we started trying to play it and stuff, all of a sudden there was just this deluge of supplemental books, and I'm like, what the heck? The first book says it's complete. Why are they making all these other books? And I didn't quite understand at the time it was to expand out the setting, because there's just so much setting information in the original source book. I mean, it's not thick with setting info, but what is there is still pertinent and holds true to continuity, all the way from that first Rifts book up through Rifts Ultimate Edition and the modern Rifts Savage World stuff. Even there are very little changes in that overall continuity, and that allows players and game masters to have their adventure in the overall Rifts world that is basically the same. I mean, that's why you don't have the coalition being overthrown at some point, like during the Tolkien War or what have you. It's still there as this big presence in the background, and it plays different roles depending on whether or not you're running something pre-Tolkien War, something during the Tolkien War, something after the Tolkien War, where they're having their crusade for humanity, or even something during the Minion Wars, where you have the demon and devil attack upon Earth, and the coalition tries to kind of rally the forces of humanity against it. So it's an absolutely fascinating setting. So right away, we played we played something. It was some kind of strange mutant between Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Riffs. I remember I had some kind of anthropomorphic Wolverine character, and then I had a glitter boy in one. And my glitter boy, I made like one shot and blew something up, and that was like kind of the end of it. And my Wolverine character was like literally a anthropomorphic Wolverine with Wolverine claws. Like the character Logan Weapon X. I know it's not very original, is it? But when you're young and playing games, that's the place to be unoriginal like that. Yeah. Over time, we learn to kind of expand upon and make our ideas a little bit more original. But anyway, so we played some of that, and there was like some kind of, I don't know, like stopping a bank robbery or something at one point, and then another was just kind of this on the road Mad Max encounter with a gang or whatever. I mean, I think that's where my glitter boy shot something. But it was run by this guy named Brian, who was just the worst player in our group. He's a dude that would roll a d20 and then he would scoop it up and say, he'd say, ha ha, nat 20. And he would pick up the die and he would hold it up and he'd say, nat 20. And you would never actually see the dice say nat 20 on the table because he would snatch it up. And it was just this horrible thing. And then for some reason, he was the one that wound up running the Palladium Adventures, that wound up running Turtles and Rifts and that kind of stuff. And yeah, they were just horrible adventures. I don't know why. So after that, our group kind of broke up, split apart. Everybody went off to school or went off and joined the military or got married or went to work or whatever. Which left me with very little Rifts experience, but still a very large rift size hole and burning in my soul to make something. So you have to go back to the setting itself when you want to decide what kind of rifts game that you're going to play. It's as simple as that. Normally, when people ask about, how do I run my first game? I want a DM, I'm not certain. I will say, go, what's the adventure you want to run? Find the adventure and start with that. Don't start with the greater anything else. Just start with the adventure because you need to see where the adventure starts. It might just start in the tavern and then suddenly Zeus teleports in and says, we need you all to go and save the world. And all of that research that you did on the setting and all the intrigue going on within the town, none of that comes into play because they instantly leave the tavern. So go to the adventure. Where does the adventure start? Does it give them time in their local town? Are they supposed to be traveling to a new town? Is that where it starts? Does the adventure start somewhere on the road? That would normally be my advice. But with Rifts, the original Palladium books, at least, this holds true, at least with those Palladium books, they weren't known for their great adventures. They didn't have a lot of singular, like, adventures in the form of modules or adventure paths or even, one shot adventures. The thing that they had closest is they did have close to one adventure path with the Tolkien War, where if you wanted to play this coalition versus the Magic Kingdom of Tolkien, you could do that. And that went through like 6 or 7 books. And but most of what was presented by Palladium books are what are called hook, line, and sinkers. Which people that are familiar with this, they've seen this. They probably played the bulk of these hook, line, and sinkers, and it's just like so and so encounters robots on the road. Okay, that's what happens, and then the the line is, well, we were attacked by robots, we don't know why, and then the sinker is, robots are brought here by aliens, so that kind of thing. So once you've played all those little, just little, almost random encounters, really, you've kind of played all of the adventures that Rifts have to offer. Now that's changed considerably with the arrival of Savage World Rifts, as published by Pinnacle Entertainment, which I recommend, at least for the adventures. I've started picking up some of their adventure books, like Blood and Banes and Empires of Humanity and Arcana and Mysticism, because they kind of condense some of the world book information of the original Palladium books, but then they also present adventure ideas of their own, and they have their own versions of limited adventure paths in those settings, which are really cool. So I like that. Hopefully, the Savage World team keeps releasing adventures like that for Rifts, because you can use them for your Rifts game, no matter which system you prefer to run your Rifts game on. Okay, so I go and I look at the books, okay, because Rifts is so expansive. You can't have an adventure that takes place in the dinosaur swamp and Atlantis. They're right next to each other. Yeah, maybe you pull that off, but then you want to include Japan or China or Mystic Russia or Australia. It's like, what the heck? I mean, or what about outer space? Then there's mutants in orbit. I mean, there's an entire source book for that talks about what's going on off Earth during the Rift's time, and like what's happening on the moon, what's happening in Mars, that kind of thing. So you just have to go and look at it. So that's what I recommend. Now, when I finally decided I was going to run a Rifts game, I, for a moment, thought, you know what? Let me run the Savage World version. I really love this Braun cover for Rift South America, by the way, where he's holding up some kind of insect head. It looks like a Zytic kind of, but maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. But that's pretty cool. I like that. There's cover for Mystic China. That's actually, I think this is a pre-Rifts book, and gosh, it looks like Jim Steranko cover. I think it is a Steranko cover. Yeah, there it is, right there, Steranko. That's actually a pre-Rifts book, but since it's all the same game system, no matter what the setting, you can actually use any of the info in any of the versions of the setting, including Rifts. Now, here's one. I remember when this came out, I was like kind of annoyed. I was like, what? I love this cover. This dude's sitting here with this crazy helmet on. He's got robot soldiers and robot guard dogs all around him. Like, what is this? And then it says Rift's source book, and I'm like confused by it. I'm saying to myself, but that other book is supposed to be complete. Why do I need a source book if I already have the complete game? That doesn't make sense to me. It kind of made me mad. So for a long time, I did not want to buy all the additional source books and world books, although I did want to buy them. That was the problem. I mean, the one that sold me on it, I was like, oh man, I just got to get this. Let me see if I can go to it here. So right here, the Vampire Kingdoms. When I saw this, I was like, oh, this looks awesome. He's got kind of like cybernetic armor or something on. I mean, I guess vampires can't be cybernetic, or can they? I'm not sure. How does that rule work? I guess not. But just this flood of vampires down beneath this guy, and you're like, Vampire Kingdoms. I mean, that is such a compelling cover to me. I mean, it gives you so many story ideas. Like, why would your character be there to begin with, to see all these vampires like turning with hunger and desire in their eyes? Like, oh, I have no idea. So anyway, so here we go. So you can check out the Palladium Books websites, their core books, world books, source books, conversion books, dimension books. Just go to whichever. There's Mutants in Orbit that I was speaking of earlier. Just go to whichever section kind of draws your eye. I mean, either the source books or the world books is kind of where you want to start, unless you want to do the space stuff, in which case you would jump straight to the dimension books. But they all plug in together, they all build upon each other. There are a few novels and short stories. There are, some individual adventures published, but not on the scale of like with any kind of major publishing company in the past, like with TSR and their prolific release of adventures, regardless of the edition. Or now, Wizards of the Coast has a little bit more measured adventure release schedule, but something like Paizo with Pathfinder, where they release adventures every month, you don't see that with Rifts, not at all. All right, so you can check out the core books, you can check out the world books, you can check out the source books. So here you go. If you're going to use the Palladium system, I mean, these are what you'll need. Regardless of what you're doing, everyone needs some version of the core rule book, whether it's the Ultimate Edition or the original, just core rulebook edition. I kind of prefer the core rulebook edition over the Ultimate Edition, but that's just me. Um, then you can take a look at the world books and just see what catches your eye. Then there's the Atlantis cover. That was another one that's a favorite for me. Just the crazy Splugorth on there. And then you've got Japan. I mean, you could have so many different types of adventures just depending on the setting. South America, there's Skyscape, the Coalition War. Now, down here is about where my eye fell upon, okay, my gaze settled upon. This section, the New West, Rift's Lone Star, Spirit West, the Coalition War. When I started looking at it, I realized, once I got to here with the Lone Star, I realized that, okay, so the Coalition has a presence in the New West, and Spirit West is something that happens all around it. And to make a long story short, I wound up just kind of making my setting from the first 16 world books, with the exception of kind of the international stuff. I mean, Atlantis could maybe do something if the guys go all the way to the coast there. England, nah, probably not. Africa, no. Triax and NGR, no. South America, maybe a little bit of lore, underseas, maybe a little bit of lore. Japan, no. South America, a little bit of lore. But here you go. Definitely using the Juicer Uprising for Los Alamos. You got Coalition War for all the Coalition stuff. Maybe some Skyscape stuff. Lone Star, all of that, all of the New West, any of the philosophies or anything from Spirit West. And you've got the Federation of Magic up there looming. So essentially, like the first 15, 16 source books, not to mention, the later books, like just the Vampire source book. Let me see if it's down here with the bestiaries right there, the Vampire source book. There's also the later world books, like stuff like the Adventures in Dinosaur Swamp or the Arsno Vampire Incursion. All these things, they all go together. There's a really nifty book, the Rifts Adventure Guide. I definitely recommend that for anyone running Rifts, regardless of the system. I can see that being really useful in Savage World. Again, one of the things I've talked about is just the great art as being a big draw for me from those Palladium books. So here's John Zalesnik's page on Facebook. I definitely recommend that you check him out. You can see here's just some of the actual art plates without all the typography on them. Really good stuff. I love the skies in the New West there. I just love this kind of the classic propaganda feel to the Mystic Russia one over here. There's the adventure setting. That's a really nifty sci-fi piece. That's the cover to the Book of Magic, I guess. Pretty neat stuff. But anyway, there you go. All right, so now I talked about my book, my choices for the books that interested me. The Lone Star being the one that kind of brought it all together, and then kind of radiating out from that. So then from there, I thought, well, I would like to come up with a setting in which people who have played Rifts before can actually continue to play Rifts and not wind up accidentally retconning any of their experiences, something to that effect, right? So here you can see my Rifts game inside of Roll20. Um, this is just kind of a holding screen that I use, but it also has the entire map of Rifts North America. This is something that's fan made. You can find it floating around on the internet. It shows all the various factions where they have control over what territories and whatnot. And here you can see our group all lined up there beneath the, Rifts. The, Rifts. Logo. Um, yeah, so, so, what I would like to come up with a setting in which people who have played Rifts before can actually continue to play Rifts and not wind up accidentally retconning any of their experiences, something to that effect, right? So here you can see my Rifts game inside of Roll20. This is just kind of a holding screen that I use, but it also has the entire map of Rifts North America. Um, yeah, so, I love the idea of having the coalition and the vampire kingdoms just kind of side by side in that Lone Star area. There's a great picture of the Zytikiks. Um, and that was what helped cement the notion of using the Lone Star area and the Pecos Empire and all these things that are a part of it, because I love that kind of wild territory. So that's to me like, okay, well, how do I come up with reasons for them to have adventures out there? Are they escaped coalition agents? Are they just mercenaries? Can I do something else? And I did always love the kind of the idea of mercenaries, and I love the men on a mission type adventure, Dirty Dozen type stuff. So I got to thinking about that and various ways we could pull that together. And to make it a little bit more sci-fi, then I thought, well, let me come up with some different concepts. And I came up with the idea of the last wall. And essentially it's this great techno organic metallic wall that just kind of appears across the southern border of the Lone Star Territory, the Pecos Empire, stretching from coast to coast, essentially. Um, People don't know where it came from. It just appeared like essentially overnight, or people just started discovering it. The coalition claims it's part of one of their experiments, but then, like the shamans and people that are connected to the spirit west, uh, think it's a sign from the gods and this sort of stuff. So anyway, so it lends itself to these new groups of mercenaries which make their way out to the wall to uh, to help defend the wall, to help defend the various gaps that pop up. Um, Also to just collect bounties along the wall. I mean, it's become a place, where things happen, a trouble magnet of sorts, where people are being drawn together from the north and the south, and doing battle along this great wall, the last wall, and the group being known as the Southern Crows, colloquially. I always have a hard time saying that word. So anyway, so the idea was just kind of inject an element of modern day sci-fi satire into just a game in which we can explore various concepts. So there you go. So now we've got our last wall concept. We've got our group of Southern Crows that have banded together to do this. Um, so what we did was started converting classic, deciding what the adventure was. Now we've settled in on the setting, and then I decided, okay, well, what are the adventures that we can run? And I just went through all of my books, whether it was RIFTS books or old D&D books or um, Shadowrun books or Marvel superheroes or DC books or Mutant Crawl classics, just anything, anywhere that I could find an adventure that had been presented in some kind of structure. So for their first adventure, they take a. This is not a spoiler for anybody because all this is homebrewed. So they agreed to take a bounty to retrieve a missing data pad that had been missing for quite some time, belonging to a former coalition ISS agent. So anyway, so this data pad that predates the Tolkien War anyway suddenly pops up on their GPS uh, the night before, just mysteriously after seemingly being lost in South America, right? So this group of crows decide to take the bounty to go retrieve the data pad, not knowing what it is, who has it, or what have you. So they come into this place, and it's actually in a sanctuary in the wall. So they have to go into a section in the wall here, and they find where it's been kind of taken over by a group of wasteland mutants who set upon them right away. Here you can see some of the wasteland mutants. They're laying around unconscious. We put the little unconscious face on them right there. They knocked them up. They didn't knock them out. Excuse me. They didn't kill all of them, which was good. That was a very good thing. Made their way through this Byzantine collection of artwork and pieces and whatnot. I actually discovered that there were two older model Skelelots functioning in here that they had to deal with. They got shot up by their first encounter with laser rifles. There you can see our character of Mushu there, who was examining the rifles and whatnot. They actually figured out how to disconnect the rifles from the bots, and they retained a full clip charge. They just need to recharge them with new E-clips. And now here they made their way over here where they discovered this kind of grisly ad hoc med bay where something had been strapped to the table with filthy straps and whatnot, and there's like blood and grisly bits of gore and bodies everywhere. And they discovered that there were two wild vampires in here that attacked them, two wild vampire spawns. They eventually made their way through a secret passage into this larger room here, which was being held down by another group of wasteland mutants firing at them from the other side of this man-made structure. They figured out how to tear their way through, and they were confronted by the master vampire, which was actually the former ISS agent who had been turned to a vampire at some point during his travels to South America. You can see here he had this little workshop set up. You can see here's our resident dog boy Apollo. Pretty neat. Oh yeah, they met Evie Rodriguez here from Reed's Rangers. She had been scoping out the area because there had been news of vampire activity here along this section of the wall, and she was aware of the presence of these guys, but there were too many of them for her to do anything about it. So once our group of Southern Crows came through here and they started kind of laying waste to the entire group, she was able to follow them in and introduce herself and offer some help, and also make sure that they knew how to properly destroy those vampires. And that's what they did. And there you go. And that is pretty much how I came up with my RIFTS game, why I came up with it, how I developed it. So I didn't say it outright, but I purposely did not look at the RIFTS Savage Worlds books at all until I had kind of come up with my setting ideas, mainly because I wanted to see what I could come up with. And I just thought, well, you know what? If I can't come up with anything, then I can always go look at their books then and maybe get an idea, or just do whatever it is they're doing. And that was when I learned about the Tomorrow Legion and the kind of this new era of the Tomorrow Legion. And I really liked the idea behind that. And I thought it was kind of cool that the Southern Crows are kind of the mercenary, dirty parallel to the much more cleaner, squeaky clean Tomorrow Legion. So pretty interesting. So I was happy with what I came up with there. So anyway, this is Jamie, your Rifter GM now. Maybe I'll do another video where I talk about the mechanics of how we're running this game, but we'll save that for another time. I hope you enjoyed. Give this a like, thumbs up, all that. See you next time.